So this is episode 5 in my series entitled William like Wilberforce. We are in a Sunday evening event for a Daily Thunder event. We did this last year. Then we have our training season. And during the training season, I personally went through a series called Spiritual Lessons from the Time of Nero. And this is a very, very different feel. But in this sort of what we would call an off season here at Ellerslie, it's not really off for those of us that are working, but it's off in the sense that we don't have students. We do these, I've been doing these Sunday night events where I'll do like 4 episodes. And so you'll see me in the same outfit for 4 consecutive weeks here if you're following Daily Thunder. And so sorry if you don't like my outfit, you're sort of stuck with it visually. But we are in episode 5, like I said, and we're building around a time period of history and sort of unpacking it to see how it relates to us. This particular time period and the characters in it have had a significant impact on me. And it's even in sharing this series, you're seeing the points that have most impacted me. But it's also a hard thing to express for me, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this series. I sort of wanted to give myself an excuse to try and articulate. And so Wilberforce, that comes from the guy named William Wilberforce. The time period we're sort of covering, which is very loosely being covered, is 1793 to 1833. It's a very significant time period in which a group of Christians, men and women, are going to sort of forge an alliance and labor together in a place called Clapham, England, which is now sort of a suburb of London, but used to be sort of out in the country. And they are going to become a formidable group in England to the point that the culture of England is going to be altered because of this group. This group is decidedly Christian, with a primary motive of sharing the gospel with their nation, but with a secondary motive of wanting to change England so that all of England could not just know Christ, but then become a vehicle through which Christ could be shared with the nations. So it was two-pronged. It's to share the gospel and to see people come to Christ, but then it's also to change the world in which they lived. And that combination, which I have been sort of building on, is a unique one, because as the church, when we're trying to land our feet on what we are here for, if we were to land in the zone of saying, I am here to share my faith in Christ with others, I would say we're pretty close to the mark. I mean, that's right in the zone. It's not just that I would know Christ, it's that I could then share Jesus with others so that they could know Christ. And somehow I'm very close to hitting the bullseye with my purpose when I get into that zone. And so what you're going to see in what I've termed the third generation Christianity here, Clapham evangelicalism, 1793 to 1833, is you're going to see a movement away from the Church of England, which most people would have just described as dead. It was a social club. It really had no fire, no desire to go after Jesus or to share Jesus with anyone else, to this evangelical movement, which is going to be somewhere between 1740 to 1790, or 1750 to 1790. That's when you're going to see the rise of like John Wesley, George Whitefield. And you're going to see this movement of sharing Jesus with the lost, sharing Jesus with the weak and the poor. But the message and that which most identified that time period was evangelism. And now we arrive at another generation. It's the William Wilberforce generation. And they are going to catch a vision, the same vision, to share the gospel with the nations. So they're going to start multiple missions groups. They're going to actually launch missions in India. It didn't exist. It was illegal. And they're going to work and labor to see that missions can actually start to reach India, for instance. They're going to do elaborate measures to share the gospel with the nations, but they're also going to seek to change England itself. So many of them are actually in the government. William Wilberforce was an MP, or a member of parliament. And he is mainly going to be known and recognized in history as the man who sort of stopped the slave trade. He is going to almost apparently single-handedly do this. However, it wasn't single-handed. He was a part of a group of Christians that were all laboring together, and they all knew their role. There was a lady named Hannah More in the group who was a great writer. And so she basically took what Wilberforce was doing in and through Parliament, and she did it through the pen. And they had all sorts of different backgrounds. They had bankers, they had pastors, they had this unique gathering that together formed a world-changing alliance. And for me, I have to admit, it so intrigues my soul to ponder that same idea today. And of course, that's part of the reason I'm bringing it up, but it's more than just that. It's also this dimension that I see in and through their life, and that is their care for the weak. Practically speaking, Wilberforce could not separate the sharing of the gospel from the reaching of the weak, the poor, the widow, the lost, and the orphan around him. They were combined. And so when they would go to share the gospel, they also would bring goods. They would do deeds. They would actually strengthen those that were weak practically. And I think that combo package, which I've been discussing through the first 4 messages, is of extreme importance for us as the body of Christ to reawaken to today. All right, so let's begin. My clicker immediately starts with a rough start, but here we are. Part 5, Rocky Road, please. Now, for those of you that like Rocky Road ice cream, this is like, immediately, this is your message right from the very beginning. I'm not at all going to talk about Rocky Road ice cream, though. So sorry about that, even though you're very excited, and I've already sort of whet your palate to launch into this. But it is sort of this unique thought. When you go into Baskin and Robbins and you want to order your ice cream, you would say, Rocky Road, please, right? And not many of us, when we think of ordering our life, this version of life that we would like to live on this earth, ever think of coming up to the counter and saying, Lord, I would really like a rocky road, please. No one wants the rocky road. It's interesting, I've been looking in with Kip and Harper into a Spartan race, and we've been sort of looking at different things about how it works, and rocky road is a good way of describing it. It's like purposely setting up obstacle in front of you so that you could overcome the obstacle. It's like, who really wants to do that? But there are certain people, and it's strange because I have to admit there is a part of me that's intrigued by that idea. But in life, we usually want no rocky road. We want the easy road. We want the open road. We do not want a difficult way. The word for narrow, when you get to narrow way, that fewer those that find, is a way of difficulty and compression. Well, who wants that? And so, rocky road, please. The power of unpopularity. I heard a man say the other day that one of the best things that ever happened in his life was when he was fired from his job and he became extremely unpopular. And you think about that and you're thinking, how could that be a good thing? Because it reminds you of your humanity. Because sometimes when we're succeeding, we think it's us. We think it's because of our innate ability. However, when you go through a difficult stretch, you get a heightened sense of your neediness for God to intersect your life. And so the power of unpopularity, it works like a medicine. So here's a quote from William Wilberforce's journal, which goes along with this concept. It's a journal entry in a specific year that I'm going to be covering, and that's 1793. And he's going to say, becoming more unpopular may not be bad for me in spiritual things. So he's going through a tremendously difficult stretch. Every one of us could use a 1793. So William Wilberforce, still to this day, is considered one of the greatest men in history. However, in 1793, he was not very well liked. Let me just put it that way. He was a difficult man for Great Britain to know how to respond to because of some of the events that were taking place in the world. And if you know your world history, you could attempt to put those pieces together. Might be hard. Most of us aren't experts in British history and French history, but that would help in this particular situation. Well, obviously, we're close to the American Revolution in this time. We have George Washington as president in the United States, just to give you some context worldwide. Stephen Tompkins, in his book, The Clapham Sect, said this: William Wyndham, the Secretary of War, publicly condemned Wilberforce's petition for peace with France as a motion for submission, humiliation, degradation before an inveterate and insolent enemy. He privately condemned Wilberforce as a wicked little fanatical imp and told Lady Spencer, "Your friend Mr. Wilberforce will be very unhappy any morning to hand your ladyship to the guillotine. Will be very happy any morning to hand your ladyship to the guillotine." The king publicly snubbed him, and he was estranged from Pitt for months. Now that's saying a lot that you don't have a lot of context for. William Pitt was his closest friend. He is going to become the prime minister and is the prime minister at this time. But you have something known as the French Revolution over across the English Channel that is taking place in France. And Wilberforce has a burden, and that is to stand for the abolition of the slave trade. But to stand for the abolition of the slave trade is making him sound a lot like these rebels and these revolutionaries in France. And so everyone is turning on him in 1793. I don't know how many of you would like to be called a wicked little fanatical imp. It doesn't sound very positive, does it? The strange secret of success: difficulty. I wrote a book to Leslie. We're almost about to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary. In fact, it's probably going to, be in the time when this, out of these 4 episodes that I'm doing tonight are going to come out. But 30 years. On our 20th anniversary, I wrote her a book called Barracks 28, because that's the name of our marriage. We named our marriage. And Barracks 28 comes from the book. I don't know if it was the book The Hiding Place. I think it's from her other book, Tramp for the Lord. But Corrie ten Boom's book, Tramp for the Lord, where she goes in and dives into their time in Ravensbrück when they were in a concentration camp. The concentration camp, the particular barracks that they were in was called Barracks 28. And one of the legendary statements that came out of that is Barracks 28, the crazy place where they still have hope. Because every night they had a Bible study, every night they would pray, and all the women in this barracks go from despondent to having hope. Nowhere else in all of Ravensbrück was there hope, but there was hope in Barracks 28. And so one of the ways that I would articulate our marriage to Leslie, because we were in the midst of a war zone. When we started our ministry, we were attacked and attacked and attacked at every turn, and it felt so unfair. It's like all we're trying to do is share truth. We're trying to share something that would help people's lives. And it was like we were the target of the enemy and we were being just destroyed. And it was very difficult. I'm just going to summarize a huge period of my life as very, very, very difficult. And yet, when I was writing that down, one of the things I am going to start with as a premise is that the reason we had a great marriage after 20 years is not because things went the way we had planned, not because they had gone in an easy fashion, but because of our difficulty. Overcoming difficulty can either destroy you, difficulty can either destroy you or can make you stronger. And if you respond to difficulty with faith, it actually increases your life strength and gives you an advantage in life. That's why children are like strength in the hand of a warrior or like arrows in the hand of a warrior. Why would they? Have you ever had children? They don't make your life easier, so how could they be strength in your hand? Because they make you stronger. So they become your secret source of strength. When you have children, it's amazing what it does to work maturity in you, a maturity that you could never get any other way. And so the strange secret of success, difficulty. There was a parallel in our life where one man was succeeding, and it seemed like everything he touched just turned to gold. And we were, also authors and speakers at the same time, and everything seemed harder for us. And what I'm going to witness over time is that those difficulties that we endured at the beginning are actually going to become our secret strength of why, even after 30 years, we're still standing strong. Whereas why this other man, not having the same types of difficulties and seeming to have the silver spoon in his mouth, everything is just coming to him way too easily. The first time he experienced a difficulty, he collapsed, and he no longer stands for Christ. And so if I could choose, even for you, I would say, don't begrudge your difficulties. Don't complain about your challenges. Embrace them as your secret of strength. What you're going to see in British history here is that three of the most significant characters that we would say in this time period to change the culture of Great Britain are all going to go through extreme difficulties as the starting point before they made any difference. They're all going to enter in. Now, if you know William Wilberforce, you're going to say, well, come on, talk about a guy with a silver spoon in his mouth. He has so much money. Yeah, but he's going to take a stand, and he is going to be hated. He is going to be called, what, a wicked little imp? He is going to, by the greatest powers in all of the land, they are going to deride him. They are going to cry out against him. They do not want him to remain in Parliament. And he is going to be considered the offscouring. And this very man, in how he responds to that, is going to grow into a mighty man. So Otto Koning, we were listening to his message, The Weapon of Rejoicing, this past week. And so just a quote from Otto Koning, a great one. Don't waste good problems. In other words, when you have a problem, hey, that's gold for you. Don't waste that. Use it. Leverage it into greater strength, because how you respond to those problems can literally grow you into a superhero. The coveted silver spoon. Don't you wish that life were just easier? You look across the fence and you're like, why is it not hard for them to do the same thing that's very hard for me to do? Why does it come so easy for them? You know what it should be is that they're looking back across the fence at you and going, why is it so easy for me? Why do they get all the good challenges? You see, when you have challenges, you are being set up for the ultimate victory in life. Do not begrudge good challenge. That is what makes us strong. 1793, the year that Clapham really began. So I've talked about something known as the Clapham community. The Clapham saints, they were known as. The Clapham sect was what they were derogatorily known as. And this group, they lived on not all of them lived on the property, but it was like a property somewhat similar to Ellerslie. It's one of the reasons why when Philip was first telling me about this, it spiked my interest. It's like, okay, I'm very interested in that. What is this? Had a little chapel just like ours. It had multiple houses on the property. And this was like the gathering place of, in hindsight, we look at it, it's like the who's who in who changed England. At the time, they weren't a well-known group of people. But this group banded together became so much stronger than any individual that participated in it. But they all were rallying around this church, and they were focused on Jesus Christ with a desire to take Jesus Christ into the world, utilizing everyone's skills and abilities. So this one's really good at communicating. All right, we want to use it this way. Oh, this one's really good at banking. Okay, we want to use it this way. This person's a great writer. Okay, let's use it this way. So 1793 is the year that it's all going to begin. So when we sort of look back, 1790 is sort of what I'm talking about, the start of this third generation of Christians. But 1793 is when you're going to see everyone sort of begin to move to Clapham. So three men that would change the world. I'm not even really going into any depth with these three men in this message, but you'll get a little bit. William Wilberforce, Henry Thornton, and John Venn. They're all about the same age, and they are each sent down a rocky road in 1793. 1793 is like the defining year for each one of these three. And it's interesting because in hindsight, we look back and say that's actually when this was all started. But it was started in and through difficulty, great difficulty. So first character, you probably don't know him, but John Venn, he is going to be the pastor of that chapel at Clapham. And so 1793, stepping into his legendary position. Stephen Tompkins said it this way: Clapham belatedly started to become the geographical focus of the Clapham sect. The watershed was the death of the rector of the parish, Sir James Stonehouse, on 13 April 1792. On the Berkshire estate where he had spent the 4 decades of his incumbency, finally allowing an evangelical successor to live in the parish, Henry Venn's son, John. Now, that isn't the most well-written sentence, to be honest with you. Long and short, when this man who had been there for 4 decades dies. This Sir James Stonehouse, who had always been the rector there, he dies, and it opens up the opportunity for this 3rd generation of Christianity to now take over this parish. We don't think in the terms of parishes, but back then they didn't just have, oh, hey, I'll start a church. Hey, I could just start a church down the road here. You sort of had a system of how it worked. This is an extension out of the Church of England, and you see evangelicalism that's sort of hijacking it and taking it over. And so this had been 4 generations in the Church of England, and now 4 decades in the Church of England, and now suddenly it's being taken over by the evangelicals, and John Venn is going to take it over. Now, John Venn was not a confident character. So if any of you were like, yeah, I'd love to change the world, but why would God use me? That's John Venn. Okay, John Venn is going to be used in a mighty way by God to actually be the pastor of these superheroes. And yet, he has really no confidence in himself. He doesn't think he can even do the job. And yet God is going to position him in such a beautiful way to do it. So Stephen Tompkins describes it this way. John Venn himself was very reluctant to go to Clapham. I am almost overwhelmed with the sense of the many and great difficulties I can foresee, he told Kitty, his wife. The prominence of the place and the power and prestige of the men he would be preaching to terrified him. I clearly see myself to be totally unfit for such a sphere. With Kitty's encouragement, he accepted the post in May 1793, but between then and moving down in March 1794, he got cold feet again. Henry wrote him a long letter beseeching him not to fight the Lord, assuring him that a sense of his own inadequacy was a good thing, and that the Lord would equip him when the time came. I think that's just a great statement, guys. A sense of one's own inadequacy is a good thing. It's sort of like Wilberforce. I think it'd be good, a little, to be unpopular, might be good for me spiritually. Who thinks like that? A Christian does. In other words, it embraces the challenge. It says, God's going to get good out of this. In other words, I'm way in over my head. I don't know how to do this. And, Henry, that's his dad, who is also a pastor, says, this is really good for you, son. I think it's fantastic that you're in way over your head. There's nothing quite like being in over your head because you'll be dependent upon God when you do your work. Assuring him that a sense of his own inadequacy was a good thing and that the Lord would equip him when the time came. The Moses transformation. You guys remember the story of Moses? Moses is one of the most fit characters to save his people that has ever existed on earth. What a special character. You even study it historically, like through Josephus. A beautiful baby, shockingly beautiful to anyone that even saw the baby Moses. He is spared from this annihilation of all the babies in that time period and actually is adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. What a storyline this is. But he's raised in the courts of Pharaoh. He's educated in the courts of Pharaoh. He, according to Josephus, becomes a military general, and he actually wins the great battle against the strongest military at the time, which was the Ethiopians. And he's responsible for the victory. So he's a military strategist. So think about what the Israelites need. They need a deliverer. We got our guy right here. And at a certain point in his life, he awakens to the fact that he is an Israelite and they need a deliverer. And you could almost see it churning in his mind like, obviously, I'm God's choice. And so he seems to take it into his own hands. He kills an Egyptian, buries him in the sand. Things are going to go south from this point forward, and he's going to then flee for his life, and he's going to live in the desert for 40 years. And what's going to happen in those 40 years is he's going to transfer from I can do it to I can't do it. When God finally invites him at the burning bush to do what Moses was assigned to do in the beginning, he says he's not the guy. He can't do it. And God says, now you're ready. There's something about being brought to the place where you don't have confidence in your ability, but you do know in God's ability. You see, Moses' secret, and the reason he's going to become one of the greatest leaders in all world history, is because he didn't think highly of himself. He thought highly of God. God, you can do it, but you might want to use someone different than me. I'm not fit for this. Now, all of us, if we're looking at the situation, we go, Moses, you're ideal for this. But Moses had been broken in the wilderness so that he could be used on the public stage. There is something about that difficulty in each of our lives that's like this. Now, hopefully it doesn't take us 40 years. to go from I can do it to I can't do it, only God can. So I'm going to go through 3 different obstacles that are definitely in the way on a rocky road. And the first one is what I'm going to call inadequacy. It is actually a beautiful obstacle to learn to overcome in our life. I could almost guarantee, maybe there's some high-minded character in here that thinks very highly of themselves, right? And it's just like, I am the perfect answer for God in this generation. Highly unlikely, right, out of this group that we are thinking those thoughts. Most of us struggle on the opposite end of the spectrum. We see other people with gifts and abilities, and we're like, I'm pathetic, God. What do I have to bring? And that inadequacy either stops us in our tracks, or we turn heavenward and say, God, you specialize in using inadequacy. So I guess I'm the perfect person for you to use. God is not calling on you because you are adequate, because you have what it takes. He's calling on you because you don't have what it takes. He does. You are simply willing. You have faith in his ability. That is your great secret. There is no Christian that has ever been worth their salt that actually thought of themselves as the solution. The secret to great Christianity is we know the solution is God's ability. So inadequacy is an obstacle, and it can oftentimes stop us from moving forward. But it can also be an obstacle that we get stronger by overcoming it. The proving of Henry and Wilbur. So Wilbur is a short for Wilberforce. He was known oftentimes by his friends as Wilbur. So both Henry Thornton and William Wilberforce, 2 close friends, as they're navigating through this, they're both going to be central characters in the Clapham community. Henry Thornton, remember his dad was John Thornton? In the very first episode in the series, I was talking about going beyond John Thornton. John Thornton is one of the wealthiest men in all of England, and he is going to serve and to give to the poor in his entire life. It's a pretty remarkable model. And then I said, we want to go beyond that. This third generation wants to go beyond that. Henry wanted to not just give to the poor, he wanted to change Great Britain. He wanted to alter the culture. He didn't want to just accept it as this. It's like, oh yeah, it's destitute. It's destitute of Christ, so hey, let's just lead some people to Christ. No, let's change the culture that is creating this destitution. And so that's Henry Thornton and then William Wilberforce. Both of them are going to have a year of travail, is what I'm calling it. Guess what year it is? 1793. Henry is a banker, and Wilberforce is an MP. So Wilberforce is in Parliament standing for the slave, to abolish the slave trade. That's his big passion. And Henry Thornton is in finance. So let's go through 1793 here. A rough start to something wonderful. So the Clapham community is going to alter the course of Great Britain's history. It's also going to change America. Abraham Lincoln is going to be impacted by the Clapham community. And his stance on slavery is going to be a direct result of what we're going to see in and through Clapham. And so the impact of what is going to take place starting in 1793 is going to change world history. And so I say gaining traction instead of gaining traction. I'm not trying to make up a word. It's just a misspelled word. Gaining traction on a rocky road. The events of 1793, the year Clapham was established. So just look at this start. I don't know what it feels like to get traction in your life. Sierra Leone, which is a colony, is going to be started by this Clapham group. And they're trying to create a culture in which slaves that are set free could actually go to this place in Africa and have a normal governmental system where they're free. And it's an experiment, but it is floundering in every possible way that you could express it. The Proclamation Society is limping forward. So this Clapham community is going to start something called the Proclamation Society. They want to improve the manners of Great Britain, which is such a funny way of saying it because I don't know that any of us have ever thought of setting out to create a society for better manners. It's like that just sounds like we need it. There's no doubt about it, but most of us have never thought about this. Wilberforce is the big push behind this. He doesn't want to just, abolish slave trade. He wants better manners in England. Respect, honor, decency. This is a profane culture. Say, wow, I don't know what he'd feel about our culture today, but this whole proclamation society was almost laughable. I mean, it was not taking root. The slave trade abolition bill floundered. Popular support flagged. The French Revolution horrified the world. So on the other side of the English Channel, you have something known as the French Revolution. Now, I don't know that I could easily, summarize the French Revolution, but when authority mishandles its authority, and now the people that have been impacted by the bad authority, in this case, Louis XVI and all of his royals, are going to fight back and form the revolutionary response, thanks to all that's going on in America, stick it to the Brits. This whole attitude is sweeping the world. And you're going to see them destroy, literally take to the guillotine the entire ruling and royal class. And so this is horrifying to Great Britain, which is based upon the similar structure of royals down to, the lower peasant sorts. It's not the same as a caste system maybe in India, but it still had that same aspect to it. And so the French military, I skipped one. King Louis XVI is going to be murdered. Okay, that's a pretty big deal in history right there. This is all happening at this time. The French military, and he's the King of France, by the way. I don't know if I tied that together for you. So he's the chief royal that is going to be killed. The French military is then now going to offer their monarchy-removing services to any and all nations. Imagine what this would feel like if you are a king and you see what's happening in France. And now the military in France, which is just a whole bunch of, ragtag characters that are coming together to say, let's take him. It's like, hey, you want us to come to England? We'll take care of your king for you. Oh, you want us to come over here? Imagine what this would feel like. And this is the very climate where Wilberforce is standing up saying we need to abolish the slave trade. Wilberforce was declared, think about this, in 1793, an honorary French citizen. Now, he didn't consider himself that. They honored him because of his fight for liberty and freedoms. So they're like, we honor William Wilberforce as an honorary French citizen. And everyone in Great Britain looks at him like, aha, that was not a good thing at this exact moment. The Earl of Abingdon declared Wilberforce Britain's Robespierre. Robespierre was the leader of this revolution. The Prince of Wales declared abolitionists, which of course William Wilberforce, the chief of them, either fanatics or hypocrites. Also in the midst of this, there's a failed harvest in the previous year in Great Britain. And this failed harvest of 1792 is going to spread its misery and unrest through the country. So there's a shortage of food. So not only do we have this revolution, we now have a shortage of food in 1793. Revolutionary graffiti appeared on monuments throughout Britain. Well, it sounds like America here. The French declared war against Britain. This is all happening in 1793. And the British economy collapsed. Now, remember who our two characters are? We have Henry Thornton and we have William Wilberforce. This is the very year that Clapham is going to start. They're going to be gathering together saying, let's do this thing. And the very first year, it's like chaos ensues. And yet, if you were to talk with both Henry Thornton and William Wilberforce, and even John Venn, and get them in a room, we have some kind of interview with them, it's like, what most impacted you and what gave you the strength to go the distance in this fight? Well, 1793. To stand firm and not give up and to keep our faith in Jesus Christ the whole way through and to watch him prove faithful. So the British economy collapses. Well, guess who is a banker? Henry Thornton. And this is the greatest trial of his life. So I'm going to describe a couple other obstacles on the rocky road that we face. Obstacle number 2 is instability. So when you have instability in your life, we've had plenty of instability in the United States, but not many of us have felt it at a very deep personal level. When you live in the suburbs, you don't oftentimes feel it as quickly. It's sort of like it reverberates through and it gets to us eventually. But when you are low in your bank account or you're not sure how you're going to make money the next day or how you're going to do this or how you're going to do this in the future, instability is a very, very big thing. And how you respond to it, it can destroy you, can turn you into a fearful, anxious, maniac, or it can grow you stronger. Just like anything else, any other difficulty, these things are actually our secret of strength when we embrace them. I'm going to give you another obstacle on the rocky road, and that is criticism and accusation. Now, Henry Thornton is going to face extreme instability. The nation of Great Britain is experiencing extreme instability, and both of them are going to, Wilberforce and Henry Thornton, are going to experience great criticism and accusation. So let's talk about Henry Thornton. The establishment of Henry Thornton's reputation is actually going to come out of 1793. What is going to make him famous and the most trusted source and person for advice in the banking realm for decades to come is going to be 1793, the amazing benefit of difficulty. So Henry Thornton, because of this, the result is he became the most trusted man in British banking because of how he walked through it. He walked through it with integrity and honesty. The difficulty proves the quality. So look at this quote about Thornton. The bank weathered the crisis, however, and in fact, Thornton's reputation thrived on it. Pitt, William Pitt, the prime minister, depended on him for a detailed estimate of the extent of bankruptcies, and later he gave invaluable evidence to the parliamentary inquiry, establishing him as an expert on credit. Baron Auckland, the founder of the National Bank of Ireland, said he was one of whom and of whose evidence it was difficult to speak in terms of adequate respect. So in the midst of this, I just want you to sort of wrap your mind around how Thornton is going to walk through this trial. Stephen Tompkins said it this way: Thornton's other contribution to the crisis was to give money to people who were struggling. So Thornton is a very wealthy man. There's no doubt about it. Okay, his dad was the wealthiest man in England. Well, I don't know how much of that he inherited. I don't know what he has access to with that, but he made his money on his own too. So he's very wealthy, but he is going to actually give money to people who are struggling in this time, which is a vast amount of people. Having been set an extraordinary example in this by his father, Henry surpassed him. His accounts for 1790, of course that's 3 years before this event, show him giving away £2,260. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot to us, but if you watch an old Jane Austen movie, you'll notice that that is a tremendous amount of money, right? Which was 60% of his total expenditure. As his income increased, he kept his personal expenses much the same and simply gave more. In 1792, with its failed harvest, he gave 7,508, which was 82%. In 1793, amid all his own crisis, this is our year right here. This is a total crisis year. With his other expenses steeper, he still managed to give away 6,680 pounds. In another year of distress, he gave away 9,000 pounds. As he told his children, I now and then perhaps approach to profusion. In other words, am I giving too much? Wilberforce followed the same example, regularly giving away a quarter of his smaller income. The great and revealing difference between them was that Thornton gave with his banker's head and Wilberforce gave with his heart. Before Thornton would donate to anyone who approached him, he investigated the case to assess how productive his charity was likely to be, while Wilberforce gave to anyone who could convince him that he or she was not a complete crook. Method, love of study, and emotional detachment were at the heart of who Thornton was. Macaulay said that Wilberforce's benevolence was the more ardent, and that his active love flies immediately to the object in distress and gives almost instinctively. Thornton's consideration leads him to weigh the best mode of imparting relief so as to raise no false hopes and to produce no future unhappiness. I mean, just meditating upon what I've just read in these past 2 keynote slides is astounding. These men are going to be established in and through 2 of the greatest crises these 2 men are ever going to face in their life is 1793. And in this year, they're both turning outward and giving to the weak around them. There is a lesson in and of itself. I used to say the secret to martyrdom is look at Stephen and look at Jesus. What are they both doing? They're thinking about those around them as they're going through pain. Jesus is going to be thinking about the thief next to him. He's going to be thinking about those that have killed him. He's going to be thinking about the care for his mother. He's being crucified. You don't have the capacity to think about other people, do you? So I've often said that is the secret to martyrdom, is to actually turn outward. The way to endure great difficulty is to not make it about yourself. And what you see Stephen doing is turning outward. He forgives those that are doing the stoning, and he has his eyes set on Jesus Christ. An amazing model. You're going to see a similar thing as these two men are walking through this trial, is they're both going to be turning outward and giving. An extraordinary amount of giving, too. In a time of great insecurity and instability, tremendous giving. Thornton's approach of giving may be less appealing than Wilberforce's. He translates as a very analytical guy, though not to Macaulay, but it was also more costly to him as well. I mean, Thornton gave a lot more away, even though he was a lot more thoughtful about it. Time being money, it was a sacrifice which Mr. Macaulay said he did not think overstated at £5,000 per annum more than what Wilberforce was giving. It's funny how they have records of how much these men gave. So remembering the widow, her oil, her flour, and her son. How do we walk through difficulty? First of all, we turn outward and we consider that which is more important than us and our circumstances. We recognize that our circumstances are a fertile soil through which God can reveal his faithfulness. In other words, we rejoice in our difficulties. When you are feeling weak, when you are feeling tried, when you are feeling pressed, to take that very thing that you want to complain about and instead rejoice in it and say, Lord, thank you for this. Thank you for what you're going to do in and through this. When you are willing to do that, that is the beginning. But then, in your weakened state, so say you're weak in finances, you might want to consider giving. Say you're weak in strength and energy, you might want to consider serving. What you're weak in is oftentimes your greatest gift that you can give. Have you ever had it in a season where you feel discouragement, and God tells you to go and encourage someone? There's something about giving that which you are shortchanged on, which has a profound impact in the spiritual realm. And that is seen in this story of remembering the widow of Zarephath. Elijah is they're in the middle of a drought. Elijah prays, and then 3.5 years there's been no rain. Elijah's been fed by a brook, by a raven, and that brook's going to dry up. The raven's going to stop delivering that meat, and now suddenly Elijah's going to be commissioned to go to a widow in Zarephath to find his supply. Now, this widow doesn't have anything. She is at her end as far as supply. So, I mean, if you're Elijah, you're going to be thinking, this is a very bad idea. However, if you were to look at Elijah as being a Christ figure in this story, that the purpose and the ministry of Christ, the glory of Christ in this generation, who's he coming to? To be fed and nurtured. Someone who doesn't have anything. A widow? A widow can't take care of that burden. And yet God is going to assign Elijah the task of going to this widow. And the widow, even as he's coming to her house and walking through the gate, she is going out to prepare her final little loaf of bread. So all she has is a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil left. That's all she has. And what Elijah asks her to do is he says, could you make me a cake with that? Because this is all I have. He's like, yeah, why don't you feed me first? And all she has is a little bit of water left. And could you get me a drink of water? Well, it hasn't rained in 3.5 years. One of the scarcest commodities is water. So basically, it's like, give me all you have. And then listen to this, guys, and it will never run out. If you give me what you have, you will never lack. You see, when you're in your weakened state, this is the ultimate opportunity to see the supernatural work in your life. When you are weakened, you trust that God is greater. This widow gives her oil and her flour, and it never runs out until the rain returns. The other thing she has, her one lone source of hope, is a son. In other words, when this guy grows up, then he can provide for her. It's sort of like her insurance policy, and guess what? He gets sick and dies. You see, you're going to also watch in this story that God is going to be asking in and through Elijah that this widow would relinquish her son and give her son up. And she does, and guess what? She gets her son back. It's like this extraordinary resurrection life story. And the same is true in our life. When we take what is our possessions, our oil, our flour, our son, where are we putting our hope? Mary of Bethany put it in a box of spikenard. Where do you put yours? And when you see Jesus, that you see his worthiness, that even in a 1793, even when everything seems to be crushing in its weight upon your shoulders, that you're willing to still live with faith and say, Lord, I trust you. Are you not able? And the answer is, of course he is. So walking the rocky road like a pro. So I finished each one of these messages with a wisdom gem of Wilberforce. And this is my wisdom gem from Wilberforce. When you have a little, give a lot. When you have a little, give a lot. And, one of my pictures for this is coming home. When my kids were young, they always liked to wrestle. And there were days when I had zero strength left. And I knew that I didn't want to be one of those dads that just sat in a chair and had in my newspaper. It's like, hey, daddy has been working hard all day. If they want to wrestle, I want to wrestle, but wow, that's hard in certain situations. And I remember having nothing left, but saying, Lord, you're going to have to supply. It's like, okay, I have a little strength left. What should I do? Give it. And you know what? God would supply supernatural strength. When you have a little, give a lot. When you go through your 1793, I want you to consider turning outward and leveraging this season of your life the way Wilberforce did, the way Thornton did, the way Venn did, to see God establish his strength in and through your life. Lord Jesus, we just ask that you would do exactly that. We ask that you would take the current difficulties that we are all facing, that you would leverage them in our life to prove your strength and power. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.